3 years ago, all you could do with a house is demolish a house and build one of those monster homes.
Hey investors, Bradley here from Watson Estates, and you're listening to the largest and fastest growing podcast for Toronto real estate on iTunes, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. As we track the market, keep you guys up to date with what's going on in Toronto and the GTA as investors. And as a broker myself, I like to know what's going on in the market, where there may be opportunities for us, and how the hell are we going to deal with this affordability crisis that has struck our city and will wreak havoc for the years to come. Well, we recently came across this really cool idea, the mini mid-rise, which really led me down this goose chase and ultimately an invitation to our guest today, Naama Blonder from Smart Density. You can check them out at smartdensity.com. She is an architect and urban planner and has won awards for her proposal, this idea of being able to buy a single lot and add lots and lots of houses on it in the main road. So today we talk about some of the challenges we face in the past as it comes to urban planning and how maybe laneways and garden suites and some other past ideas might not have actually served us in the city, but why this could be a game changer at a time when the city is searching for affordability and for ideas. In my opinion, we all have our own opinion, but this is mine. This is the best thing on the table that we have in front of us, and something that could be a serious shift in Toronto and ultimately trickle through the GTA and meet wherever you are across this great and wonderful province. So today we have a wonderful conversation. If you could, as you're learning and getting value, as we talk to guests like Naama, please hit the like button, subscribe, and I hope you guys enjoy the show. Naama, how you doing today on our show?
Very good. Thank you for having me.
Thrilled to have you join us from Smart Density. And I've been reading about some of the exciting stuff that you guys are doing over there in the news, and took the opportunity to reach out to your team directly to say, we have to have Naama come on the show and share some of the amazing ideas that could be the golden solution to the housing affordability challenges we face in the city. Before we dive into some of the concepts, the ideas you guys have formulated, could you share a little bit about yourself? Tell us about how you got to where you are today.
Wow. Okay. So Smart Density is an architecture and urban planning firm. I am an architect and an urban planner. And I really, that's the premise of our business, to merge the two perspectives of where policy, urban planning, where the city anticipates growth and density, and architecture, design, and how buildings actually work. And it's been our secret sauce since we opened almost 5 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. That's a different angle. And I guess a lot of people understand architecture and what that entails. And obviously, we're going to get into some development ideas that you have. But what is the urban planning, maybe to bring everyone up to speed? And now, not to discredit the savviness of our listeners. A lot of listeners probably do. But just so that we're all on the same page, what does that look like for you and your business?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. My partner was an urban designer at the City of Vaughan, and I oftentimes saw, the eyes rolls when people, when he said, I'm an urban designer. So everything that falls under this urban planning and urban design. So basically, an urban planner will have, their role would be, more about discussion about height, density, what is the general direction, what are those big visions that we want to see. A lot of the times we talk about 25, 30 years, that's tomorrow in urban planning terms. So when we talk, and we often say, oh, the city or the process, so that's urban planning. And how do we make it more efficient, right? How do we see the growth that we want to see? Toronto is growing with or without us.
Yeah.
How we build for that, plan for that, and what is the vision?
It's a very interesting space to be in these days, because I think there's a lot of confusion and just disagreement on what people would have the city of Toronto look like in the next 5-10 years. And I think that maybe it's a bit of the city catching up to us and people realizing we got to get a bit more of a handle on this. There's a little bit of chaos as far as what ends up happening. And for our audience's sake, you and I had a conversation before we got into this, and maybe we can start here, is some of the ideas that are before us today on how to address the lack of supply issue, which is maybe not the full equation, but definitely a big component in the real estate industry right now. And the solutions have been subpar, right? We're talking laneway housing, garden suites. Maybe there's some other ones that you've seen coming down the pipes, but I have yet to see one that I think will be that thing to take us to the next 10 years of development and addressing the issues we face. Maybe tell us about your experience so far and where we are today.
When I'm asked about the future, I always say, let's look into the past, because we have a 40-year-old policy that not only protects, but keeps our houses, the neighborhoods, as they are, as the neighborhoods are. You're not allowed. So, if you would come to the city, 3 years ago, all you could do with a house is demolish a house and build one of those monster homes. That's all you could do. You couldn't add units. You couldn't have, we're looking up to Montreal or any other European cities when you have these walk-ups or, several levels of residential units. Here you couldn't. And it's been like this for 40 years, right? So when we talk about policy changes, we have a lot of work to do to, and you talk to me about, not you, we talk a lot about the affordability crisis. You can only build higher density on not even 10% of the land of the city of Toronto. So when you're, again, it leads to your urban planning question in terms of land use, you can only build mid-rise and tall buildings on land that is designated mixed use or apartment neighborhoods.
Yeah.
This is that land counts for 10% of the city, while 75% you can't do anything there. So we can't really be surprised when we hit by this insane affordability crisis, because we are bounded to this policy. And you mentioned laneway suites and garden suites. I mean, this is nice, but we're going to need a lot of laneway suites to solve the affordability crisis. A lot. So I don't think that's enough. Like our office, we don't do that because we don't believe it's enough. So when we get a call from a homeowner, we need at least 4 units on a property, because that's what I believe personally, that this is smart density. We need to be near transit. And these neighborhoods are desirable neighborhoods. You talk about the 15-minute neighborhood. They're near transit, near retail, walking to your coffee shop. We need to build more in those neighborhoods.
There's some good stuff in there, and not to discredit folks that are capitalizing on the opportunity to invest in garden suites and laneway housing. I think there's a good opportunity for the investor, but it doesn't address the amount of housing that we need. And one of the good points that you made there is this, this idea of the yellow belt, this idea that we have such a small fraction of areas that we can actually develop, let alone the slow process in the development of those areas. So there's a lot of roadblocks that are happening here. And I like to think that just keeping up with the news, and to bring everyone up, maybe go back, everyone, listen to our last episode. We were talking about some proposals coming to the province to try and streamline this, and hopefully some of them get some traction. But my question for you, Naama, is what do you see then with all of these things in mind as good development? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, that's a question that keeps me very, very busy. So for us, anything that, for us to take a project, it has to fall under the smart density definition. It needs to be near transit. And then in our projects, we ask to be, to have zero parking. And that is a huge component even before the city changed their parking requirement, because parking is very, very expensive. And it has to be in those, urban centers. It means that it's already established, not suburban feeling. So for me, good development is this 15-minute neighborhood style of thinking. Everything is walkable. And, we talk about the trade-off, right? Okay, I get it. So it won't be 2,000 square foot house on the 4th floor. I get it. But what you're getting in return, the fact that you can, walk to a museum in over the weekend because you're with your kids and you don't need to take care of your roof, right? Or I have friends who moved to the suburbs the same week that we moved to our 3-bedroom condo too, because we wanted to stay in the city. The same day she had to buy another car, and she's telling me, even if I want to walk around, there isn't even a sidewalk in my neighborhood to walk on. So this is the trade-off. So if you ask me about that vision, is more density in existing established neighborhoods.
Interesting. Now, does the size of the unit matter? I mean, you mentioned take my small kids. And then we kind of, I guess to you, how would you define the missing middle? Are these 2-bedroom condos? Are these townhouses? Are they, what does that look like in order to satisfy the demand to keep young families in the city?
I'm really glad you asked that question. So the missing middle, let's cover the definition to make sure that we are on the same page. The missing middle is referring to any type of building or housing that is more than or has more units than the single family house and is not the mid-rise and tall buildings. So according to the City of Toronto, we are talking about multi-unit residential buildings up to 4 stories. And you mentioned, your investors, and you mentioned how Laneway Suites has been a good investment so far. Why stop there? Why, if it couldn't be, a triplex, a fourplex? We're working now on an 8plex. From an investment point of view, makes much more sense. Every house that already, can get a laneway, the price of land reflects that potential. And it's really about getting more units and getting more housing options. And for me, so we covered the definition of the missing middle, but the missing middle for me is also about the missing middle of, mix of units and mix of income. And right now, the housing supplies does not reflect the diversity of our city. It has the houses that most of us can no longer afford, our generation. And it has the really small condos. And let me tell you, I've mentioned my 3-bedroom condo. It was really, really hard to find. Like the supply of family friendly, something that is closer to, European standards in terms of what it is, really hard to find.
That's the first time I've heard missing middle defined that way. My perception of missing middle was maybe more vague than the definition you gave. It was this idea of having a place for someone to go that isn't a 1-bedroom or a den or a bachelor condo, but a place where you can have 2-3 bedrooms that's within the 15 minutes. The way that you said it was, it's a 4-unit or within.
It's a multi-unit up to 4 stories.
So where do we even find those? Like, they don't exist.
Where you find those in Montreal and in European cities.
Yeah.
In Montreal, it actually, we walk in Montreal and we say, this is wonderful, this is so urban. And yet a development application comes in, you hear all the NIMBYs that you can possibly have. And I always say, if we're having a discussion around height in 3 to 4 stories, this is not about height.
Yeah.
It's about something else. It's about change. It's about new people coming to your street. It's about, people that are different from you. This is not a debate about 3 or 4 stories where it's allowed as of right in the zoning that you could have that height, but just for a monster home, it cannot be the thing. It cannot be the real issue. So I really like the way you defined it, because it's definitely the soft definition of missing middle. That's why I said for me it's also about diversity and mix of units and mix of income and opportunities. That what do you do if you can't buy a house and you're basically pressed to move out from the city to the suburbs? And so where you find those? So we currently are working on several projects. We have a 15-unit project that we're working on. It's on a single lot, and it's 4 stories. So we have an approximately 3 to 4 units per floor, and with a really good mix. We have 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and 3-bedroom, and usually, and the 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom are kind of a loft style. And you usually don't hear about this mix in such a small project, because developers are really trying to push for the smallest square foot possible. And I get it, because price per square foot is so expensive. I think the missing middle really opens up an opportunity, right? It's not that massive building. It's not as expensive to build. And it really opens up the opportunity for something else. And also, I always say also from, simple things like building materials, things that we cannot, for example, using wood or wood facade in those buildings that we cannot have in taller buildings because of code requirements. You can't have anything wood related in a tall building. But the missing middle, because it's so small, it gives it this boutique kind of feeling of really unique design, which I love.
What is the height on that point? What is the height that you're able to go up as far as stories and using wood before you have to start getting into, high-rise structures?
It depends. Okay, so the building code allows buildings up to 6 stories to be constructed in timber. Now, when I mentioned the wood, I actually meant it in incorporating warm materials in the facade, so it's different from the structure of the building. Most of the buildings you see here in the city are either concrete in the mid-rise and tall buildings, or just simple stick frame. All the houses, this is how they're built. So the 4 stories, it really depends. The foundation will be concrete. It could be wood frame. I mean, it really depends building to building, but definitely the option is there. The building code, to answer your question directly, is up to 6 stories could be built in timber.
Yeah. So to kind of close that point out, what's shocking to me is that the city of Toronto is defining that as the missing middle and that it's needed. And I don't see any push to do what you're describing, which is why I'm so drawn, why I think the media is so drawn. There's something in here where you're actually doing what the city wants to see, what people want to see, what the city needs, which leads us, and I definitely want to dive into this idea of the mini mid-rise, which is kind of what you just described. Tell us, I guess, maybe how you got there and describe it beyond what you have already with why the mini mid-rise.
Okay, so the mini mid-rise is a concept we developed, and it won the Ontario Association of Architects Award, the Shift Award for Resiliency. And I really encourage your listeners to check it out. It has a very provocative image that's drawn a lot of attention lately. Go to our website, smartdensity.com, and you'll find it there. But the mini mid-rise is basically, first of all, it doesn't fall under the definition of missing middle that I shared. Like, it's not, according to the city, it's not, and I'll explain why. The mini mid-rise is basically we said this the following. We asked ourselves, why don't we see more mid-rise buildings in the city? The city of Toronto had 11 years ago put in place the guidelines. They really wanted to see more mid-rise buildings, more, on the avenues. And when I say an avenue, it's an official term to our main street. So Bloor, Dundas, College, St. Clair, Eglinton, all of those are considered an avenue in the city's definition. And yet it's been 11 years, and you definitely see those, but maybe not enough, not the amount you would expect. And one of the things that we realized is that the assembly of several properties, right? Because sometimes all the big corner lots, okay, they were developed as mid-rise, done, deal, great. But now you need to really assemble, because Toronto's main streets lots are pretty narrow and deep. So you need to consolidate about 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them in order to have a decent frontage for a mid-rise building. So we said, why not taking the mid-rise design guidelines and we will just deploy them on a single lot? And that's why you saw in that image, which is a 6-story building on a single property, something that looks like we took it, some tell me Tokyo, but it's, I would say, more Amsterdam than anything else. And it's just a townhouse, but it's like 6 stories. We have 2 units per floor. And in some cases, we're working on it's 4, if the frontage is wide enough, 4 stories per floor. So we really reach 18 to 20 units easily, very, very easily. So yeah, so we presented this concept to the city because we wanted to make sure it's going to work. It has no parking, but that's okay because it can only happen on, it can only be built on those main streets to begin with, Bloor, Dundas, College, which already has great transit. So no parking, and the city loved it, gave us the green light, and yeah, and we we proposed it as part of the Ontario Association of Architects Shift Award, and we won, and it got some really great publicity since then, I have to say.
And I will say I also love it. That's why I said we got to get these guys to come on and tell us a little bit about it.
Thank you.
What size would these units be? So let's say you've got, maybe we'll stick with the model of 6 stories, 2 units per story. What would be the approximate size of that design that you've got initially?
Yeah, so we reached 700 to 1,000 per unit, square foot per unit. And again, it depends on the frontage of the lot. So if we have, 25 feet of frontage, we could easily fit 2 units on the front and 2 units on the back.
Wow.
And you can see on the plans, we put all the circulation, elevators, stairs in the core of the building, because that is the most efficient way to do it. And then you have this little bit of the building plan is actually of a stretched U shape. And you will see there's this in kind of an interior courtyard in some cases, and that allowed us to also have more natural light to the unit. So we want to increase the number of bedrooms, and bedrooms have to have windows. And that interior courtyard also functions as a social gathering place, because remember, this is not the massive condos with, gym you pay for and pool you pay for, which is an advantage, because condo fees, maybe that should be another topic for your podcast, but condo fees is a huge burden on affordability. So the missing middle is really, or this type of scale of projects really opens the door to not paying $600 per unit on condo fees, because you won't have those amenities. So this courtyard is functions as a social gathering place. The circulation is there, also brings natural light to the units. So it's a kind of a win-win. So you can see in the plan on our website how it actually looks like.
The other thing that fascinates me is this broken telephone on what defines housing affordability. Is housing affordability a place for someone to own, which is very much the pitch of the real estate boards, or is housing affordability a place to rent within your affordable means, which is a whole other issue, or is affordable housing subsidized affordable housing? You mentioned condo fees. I'm curious, this design, does it lend itself to any of these sections, or is this built specifically for condominiums and for the purpose of selling it and eventually leading to home ownership among Torontonians?
I am so glad you asked this question, because I'm sure that a really high percentage of your audience wants to know the definition of what are we talking about when we talk about affordability. So let me tell you, you don't know the answer for a good reason, because there isn't an answer. No one defined, not at the federal, provincial, or municipal level, what are the affordability formula that they're using. So, when I advocate for affordability, I volunteer with organizations that, deeply affordable, people that, experienced homelessness. When I personally, in our practice, we talk generally about housing affordability, not affordable housing. Housing affordability, what are the options that you and I, our generation is facing? Because let me tell you something, we think Toronto is unaffordable now. Can you imagine Toronto in 25 years from, what our kids will experience? And I know we think, oh, this is crazy. We've seen nothing yet. And let me tell you on a personal note, I moved here from Tel Aviv 8 years ago, Tel Aviv, Israel. And Toronto, 8 years ago, was the affordable option for me. And the reason we left Tel Aviv is the affordability crisis. We couldn't see a financial future for ourselves. And we said, okay, we can't do that. And since then, Toronto did a really good job in keeping up with the affordability crisis, or worsening the affordability crisis. But it's not going to be the thing. People are going to leave the city, because if they don't see a future for themselves, like make no mistake, Toronto will lose talent. And when we talk about housing affordability, there's a wide spectrum. So when you hear, municipal plans or things like that, they define according to market rate. So they would say 80% of the market rate, etc. And let's leave that aside. We're not here to talk about, deeply affordable units. We're here to talk about what are the options. And I would say it's not enough to build and pump to the market more and more units. We need to make sure that we have a diverse, mix of units to reflect our needs. And it's not just, the pre-construction investment. There is a market out there of, young families willing to spend, looking to buy, and the option doesn't exist. The option doesn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the stats speak for themselves, right? We've got 80% of development focused on condos, majority of which, or not, maybe not majority, but a good chunk of them are purchased by investors. But then we look at what the demand is for young families. 80% are looking for low rise or this missing middle category that simply doesn't exist. And I see the brokenness in there. So just to clarify and to bring it back to that, to end that question, are we looking at condos and or rental suites, or is this whole design based on purchasing and owning in the condo market?
No, absolutely not. It could be, and that's the great for investment. It means that the developer doesn't need to have the access to massive capital as you would see in mid-rise and tall buildings. It could be small project, an 8-plex to a 15 units, something like that, right? Or 20 units, and it could definitely be even moms and pops or investors who are looking for their first project to go ahead. And the product doesn't matter. Condo or rental, it doesn't matter. The city doesn't give bonuses if it's a rental company or a rental product. So it's really up to your pro forma and your investors' pro forma to make the call on the product.
Yeah. Yeah. So interesting, right? Because we've seen massive boosts, and maybe we can speak just for a moment on some of the effects that we've seen in past policies, but it's astonishing the speed at which laneway properties have gone up in value overnight. And now the timing of this is also interesting because we see a big push, a search for dealing with affordability. I'm curious what your thoughts are, but I really see this taking traction. I mean, you're obviously doing it, but I would love to see some of our investors on our podcast, which are investors with multiple properties, maybe not massive developers, though we have those too. The vast majority are investors that want to, have a property, maybe a 2-level on an avenue, and they want to be able to convert them into something that they can actually find occupants for and add a significant value in the city in a place that has restricted them from ever doing that. So it's all of these, I guess, moving parts are very interesting to me. But maybe out of all of that, I'm curious, what have we done in the past? How has it adversely affected the real estate market? And how is this different? How is targeting the missing middle, or what we're kind of proposing here, going to not do that and essentially squeeze more people out by adding more value to properties that we currently have?
So I will answer that. I will also mention that laneway suite, and when your audience is on our website checking the mini mid-rise, there's also a project that we did called the 8-plex. And the 8-plex, what I liked about it is the 8-plex, unlike the mini mid-rise, is really within the neighborhoods. So when you mentioned the house in the front and the laneway in the back, you just described Toronto's neighborhoods, and you mentioned the yellow belt, which I'm glad you did, because it all starts there, right? That land use designation that I mentioned at the beginning. What I like about the 8-plex is that it looks like just any other modern contemporary design house that you would have in any given street, and yet it has 8 units. So when your investors who are, the owners of several properties, I mean, obviously choose one that could yield the best result, but I would actually advise against just having a laneway suite while you can build in the same volume. That's the whole premise. You can build within the same volume as a house, just having more units each on each floor. So most of the times two. That's how we landed on the 8-plex policy and what we do to change things. And I mentioned that I moved to Toronto years ago. And I remember taking the subway, I don't know, somewhere like Bathurst or Christie, not too far. And then I walked, and I started walking, and steps away from the subway, you have these neighborhoods of just single family houses. And I remember thinking, how far did I go? Like, because someone who, I studied in Paris, I lived in Tel Aviv, for someone who's coming from, I always say there aren't any backyards in Paris, and yet you would love to raise your kids there. For someone who's coming from this typology of cities, it blew my mind that steps away from expensive infrastructure. Okay, this is taxpayers' money. All you can have is that single family houses, and you have the few that enjoy the investment of all of us. So when we talk about policy and what can be changed, we should really start there.
I see. So I'm going to get your thoughts on what's coming through 2022, but based on what you're describing here, this not in my backyardism, people not wanting that change. Have you found that the image of a 6-story on the main streets, it is, as you mentioned, like, it's definitely like, what is this? I'm curious, is this something that but then you're talking about how we can have these detached, instead of a laneway, have multiple units, and you almost can't even tell the difference. So I'm curious, like, do you see a lot of pushback as we do this, or is this just, maybe there's not that many? I'm just curious, what's the feel out there? How many people actually care that their little detached neighborhood is seeing these multifamilies, and how much is it more of a like the voice of a few kind of permeating through the media and making us all think that this is a big issue and holding everything up?
So about the mini mid-rise, and just remember, this is just 6 stories. 6 stories is not that tall. It's not that high. It's not that provocative. I think what's very catchy on that image is that it's a narrow lot, and then we went up 6 stories. But here's the thing: when you talk about the mini mid-rise and you talk about the main streets, Bloor, College, Dundas, people expect density or development there. So in terms of objection, we didn't have any, because they say, okay, it's Dundas, like, of course, where would it be? It's a commercial street. So we never had any problem with that. When it comes to the neighborhood, what surprises me when I present a project to the community, and we are like, let's say 150 meters from a subway station, and I say that this project doesn't have parking, and they say, do you expect us to believe that families could live without a car? Yes. I expect you to believe. First of all, I live without a car. I live this car-free lifestyle. I live downtown. I walk downtown. I work downtown, and I walk to work. And I hope, and I have kids. So I hope to, maintain that for as long as I can. But you need to understand that this is the future the city is heading, and it's more sustainable and it's more affordable. And City Council wants that within 5 years, that every ride within the city will be made using public transit. So not using the car for like small, short rides. Because as I said, if we're mentioning height as a problem in 3 and 4 stories, it's not about height. And so we have definitely some sensitive points that we know how to work with the community, walk around them, explain, we know how to talk to communities and address their concerns. It's not about height. It's definitely not, what I'm trying to say is, it's not your typical NIMBYs against mid-rise and tall buildings. The conversation is different. What else could I say here? So it's different, and you definitely hear those voices. I mean, who goes to community consultations? Those who object. So if if we're really trying to fight NIMBYs, we need to go to community consultation and speak to the benefit of projects. So if there is a missing middle project coming in your street, go make sure your voice is heard, that you think is a good thing.
So what I find interesting, obviously we've got a provincial election coming up, which is going to skew some things, But I'm interested in some of the amazing proposals coming in, where we don't have these necessary community meetups for if you're just doing a minor variances, and some of these really controversial ideas that seem to be creeping up that they're gonna become more vocalized in the media. But I'm curious where, with your conversations with the city and obviously the encouragement they have about doing some of the things that you're describing, what kind of changes do you foresee us having in the next 12 months through the course of this year? Do you see any policy changes? Do you see maybe it just being a psychological shift where people are more welcoming, and maybe the stage being set for future development, or maybe centered more around transit oriented communities being a big push? Obviously, a lot of it's going to come down to the current election and what the winning provincial party's position is on it. But I'm curious, what kind of changes do you see happening between now and next year?
I'm glad you brought up transit-oriented communities, because you know how, like, in these elections, even in the last federal election, it was no longer accepting voices against investment in transit. But if you look back, 5, 10 years, or even, further into the past, so I'm glad to see that shift, that transit is no longer on the table for NIMBYs. Transit is a good thing. Investment in transit is a good thing. It may be painful while it's in construction, but the value of your property, if we're talking about investment, it's almost magical. The discussion around housing, I want to see some bold politicians not accepting the voices of NIMBYs in the election this year against housing, against affordable housing projects that we see, against the discussion that development is bad. You had that article in the Star for the community of the beaches. If you want the village, that village experience, leave the city. Like it cannot. Toronto is not heading to be a village. So I hope to see some bold politicians and bold leaders leading this election. It's going to be very, very interesting, because I think housing, no doubt, housing will be on the table. So you probably can see it very, very clearly, or too clearly, but the street you see behind me is Bathurst. And Bathurst, if we talk again about land use and policy, Bathurst is the edge of downtown. So everything west of Bathurst is not considered downtown, and everything is east of Bathurst still considered downtown. And you can get this really clear image of the missing middle, because you have these really super low-rise buildings, and then right east of Bathurst you see 16, 17 stories, and it goes up to the downtown core. So it's very interesting. The next time you have this vast, broad view of the city, check it out, because in Toronto it's so apparent that you look left, all you see is low rise, you look right, and nothing in between.
Okay, so I guess to wrap this up, unless you have any other kind of foreseeable changes through 2022, what I really hope comes out of this podcast. Now, obviously, I tend to lean towards the investor. I try and give a voice to the tenants where they don't have it, or people that are a little more hesitant, and there's of investors and the whole concept of investment. But what I really hope we can find here as a balance is a recognition that supply, if we can have smaller investors, a platform for them to do it, we can add supply, create rental units, which we are doing, just not in the areas that they're needed, or create units that are available. Because I, as someone who is relatively well off, I'm getting to a point where I'm concerned for my children. Right. And to know that there is a mini mid-rise opportunity coming in the next 10 to 15 years for them to be able to at least get into the ownership model on their own. That's what I want. And I'd like to think that that's common across the board. And that's what I really love about this idea. I think it is a middle ground for everyone. And maybe I'm wrong. Folks can leave comments down below on if maybe I'm off base here, but I love the idea of us coming together to create housing in different ways. It's regardless of how, but also, as you're describing, form our city in a new way. If anyone's going to lose, it's going to be those that fight the NIMBYs, the ones that are fighting for the city to be as it is, their land values to rise, but not to share in it. But I tend to think we've reached, as you've mentioned, a point where, generally speaking, we all agree our city needs to transform to tailor to all people groups, not just those that have land of high value but low value to our overall city and supporting our city. So any other thoughts on these things as we wrap it up? And also, if you could share with us where people could find more about your projects, learn more about what you guys are doing.
Thank you. No, I think you actually put it was beautiful. Like really, you described it perfectly. So I'll just wrap up. I'll mention that you can find us at smartdensity.com and see all the projects and concepts that are currently not confidential. They're all on our website, but there's some really interesting concepts such as the 8-plex and the mini-meter.
Yeah. Guys, support this episode as well. You can share it on Instagram. You can tag us at Watson Estates as well. If you have any questions for myself or Naama, you can leave those on YouTube. But Naama, really appreciate you taking the time to come, and we're going to keep an eye on everything you're doing. You might have some investors hitting you up and really trying to elevate our city to the next level with you.
Can't wait.